So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining. It's the 27th of March, and my name's Martin Gilbraith, and I'm delighted to have the chance to lead this session with you today for IAF Romania. Before I say any more, I wonder, Bogdan, would you like to say a word or two about IAF Romania and your other sessions?
I would love to do that. Welcome to the 7th IAF Romania meetup. It's been the 6th online that we did. We only had one in offline. And IAF Romania, it's a chapter of International Association of Facilitators. We are in this moment, I think, 10 members. Yes, 10 members, because Decebal just joined us recently, and we are striving to connect between facilitators, to promote facilitation and to develop the skills and competencies of facilitators. This is one of our events, and it's opening up for discussing and trying to develop more of our competencies, and we thought of starting with core competencies offered by the International Association. And I asked Martin to join us because I met him in Birmingham in an IAF conference, and I really liked, on one hand, his personality, but on the other hand, his professional expertise in facilitation. And also because Martin is chairing IAF UK in England, and we wanted also to learn a little bit from his experience in that, and he accepted our invitation. So Martin, should you tell us something about yourself and what are we going to do in this session?
Certainly, I will do. Thanks very much indeed. And while I do that, please continue to share introductions between yourselves in the chat, and feel free to chat with each other there. And I'll ask just a few of you to introduce yourselves in a few minutes. First of all, briefly about myself. As Bogdan says, I'm currently the chair of IAF England and Wales chapter, where we have a number of meetups around England and Wales, and we also support our sister meetup groups in Scotland and Ireland as well. I've been involved with IAF for a long time in a number of different roles, and I am a certified professional facilitator. But I'm sharing a session with you today, which is much more based on my involvement with ICA, which is an international non-profit organization in about 40 countries, which has been developing and applying facilitation and participatory methods in communities and organizations for about 50 years. And I've been involved with ICA in a number of different roles for about 30 years, so also for a very long time. This session that I'm prepared to share with you today, I'm going to share my slide. I hope you can see that. It's about facilitation competencies, and that was the choice of topic resulted from a conversation with Bogdan. We thought it would be interesting for all of you. But the structure of the session is drawn from a series of sessions which I and some other ICA UK colleagues are leading at the moment. We're calling them Focused Conversation Online. And each session is 60 minutes. And it's an opportunity for a number of people to connect, share, and learn together on a particular topic. In this case, IAF's facilitation competencies. Also to experience the top focused conversation method of ICA. So that's the method that I'll be using to structure the session. And then at the end of the session, after we've had our focused conversation about facilitator competencies, I'll be saying a little bit about the method that I used and sharing some sources of further information and further support. So those are the aims of the session. The format, broadly speaking, after a few more minutes of introductions, we're going to invite you to go into breakout rooms and look at the 6 competencies and share something of your experience of them. And in particular, how, if at all, these competencies show up differently online than they do in face-to-face facilitation. So, and then as I say, we'll come back for a bit of presentation about the method at the end. I'm going to assume that you're all fairly familiar with Zoom, but if you're having any difficulty seeing or hearing or knowing how to participate or anything, please do let me or Bogdan know. Let's take just a few people to introduce themselves verbally as well. I'm afraid we don't have time to hear everybody, but I wonder, is there anybody who's never attended an IAF meetup before? Any newcomers? Let's give them a special welcome if there is anybody.
Yes, I'm the first meeting
Welcome.
here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Valentina.
I'm just an L&D specialist, so I'm not a member of IAF official for now, I should say. And I really want to see what's new in this session.
Thank you. Well, you're very welcome. Anybody else?
Thank you.
First time or maybe second time at an IAF session?
Hey there.
Mihaela and then Lacramora?
Sure. I think I'm also for the first time. I might have participated years ago in some kind of meetings, but I'm not sure. So currently I'm a global learning specialist at Finastra, which is a tech company. And I'm working to develop global programs, which means also facilitation, both face-to-face, virtually, building very complex programs. So it's a mixture of many things. But I'm curious to see what else is out there. And we also started at some point a project to kind of map out the facilitator skills and the differences between trainer, facilitator, and so on within the company. And we got to a point, and I'm also curious to see, you know, what is your model that you're using.
Thank you. You're very welcome. And Lacramora, excuse me the way I pronounce your name. How's it supposed to be said?
Yes, this is it. Lacramora. I know it's a very long name. It's the name of a flower in Romania. So I am a facilitator and a trainer for nonviolent communication. And I facilitate workshops and trainings in companies and in NGOs. And it's for the first time here. And I know Decebal and Anna and Valentina, and I'm very happy to meet them here.
Thank you too. Welcome. Any other newcomers? Or are there any chapter board members that we should know about? Are there any other board members here, Bogdan?
It's Florin. Florin, it's board members, and we have some IAF members.
Do we have time for all of them? How many are there? Let's hear from Florin first. Would you like to say a few words about yourself, Florin?
Hi, everyone. I'm Florin from Cluj, from the heart of Transylvania. This is also in Romania. It's happening. So I do work with only with entrepreneurs, with small and medium enterprises, and I do coaching, and I also do facilitation for management teams.
Thank you. And you're treasurer of IAF Romania.
Yeah, and show me the money every month.
It's never too late to pay your subscriptions. So who is already an IAF member? Show us a hand or use the participant list to show us your hand if you don't have your camera on. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So very quickly, just your name and 1 or 2 words about yourselves.
Daniela just waved. She isn't.
Yeah.
Daniela, are you a member or just waving?
No, I'm both waving and also a member, right? Bogdan?
You're a member of the Facebook group, but not yet
of the Facebook. Oh, okay, yes.
Right. Well, it's never too late to become a member of IAF as well. Who's already a member of IAF? Show me again.
Bulent, Marine.
Bulent, Marine, would you like to just say a word or 2 about yourselves?
Yes, hi all. My name is Bulent, and I'm pretty excited to participate in this sharing session about the competencies. I've studied them, and I'm keen on finding some views about them, how useful they are. Thanks.
Thank you. And who else was a member? Simona, is Simona a member?
Yes, Simona. Do we still have Simona?
Where is Simona? Is she gone? I don't see Simona. was there another member?
He left, I think.
Deck.
Okay,
No, you can call me Deck from Decebal. This is how people will.
perfect.
So I'm a trainer and I do training, consulting, coaching. This is what I do.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, let me share my screen again as we begin to look at the competencies. And I will ask Bogdan to begin to prepare the breakout groups. Hopefully what you can see here again is the competencies image. This is directly taken from the IAF website. There are 6 competencies. The competencies basically answer the question, what is it that a facilitator needs to be able to do in order to facilitate effectively in a range of different contexts and circumstances? There are 6 competencies, and within each competency there's a number of sub-competencies and sub-sub-competencies. So if you drill down to the detail, there's about 110 or 115 in total. But the 6, I don't know if you can read them, but A is create collaborative client relationships. B is plan appropriate group process. C is create and sustain a participatory environment. D is guide group to appropriate and useful outcomes. E is to build and maintain professional knowledge. And F is to model positive professional attitude. So what we're looking at here right now is a Jamboard, a Google Jamboard. And Bogdan's going to share, perhaps you could share the link right now, Bogdan, if you haven't already, in the chat, so that you can go and look at this yourself. What I'm going to invite you to do in breakout groups, you'll be assigned to breakout groups of hopefully 3 or at most 4 people each. And in each breakout group, I'm going to ask you, first of all, to use the annotate tool, which is over here. I can hope you can see on the left here. You can pick a color and pick a pen, and then you can annotate, underline, circle, or whatever. And over here on the left also is a sticky note tool. So you can type a sticky note here, and I'm going to ask you to use yellow. I can't remember which is which now. Yellow for a face-to-face example, and red for an online example, something like that, I think. When you get to the Jamboard in your groups, you can use this button at the top to scroll to the page that you're assigned to. Breakout groups 1 and 7 are going to be working on competency A, which is create collaborative client relationships. And what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes. And in your breakout groups, small groups, first of all, take the annotate pen and underline or mark any keywords or phrases as you read the text. And then use the post-its to try to brainstorm a few examples of where you've seen this competency in practice, yellow for online, red for face-to-face. Is that all clear? Now, there may be more than one group of 3 or 4 people working on the same competency, so you may see other people's markings and ideas on the same Jamboard, and that's perfectly fine. You can learn from their ideas as you're doing it. When we finish the breakout groups, I'll invite you all back into plenary. We'll have a look together at what you've created, and we'll share some reflections and insights, in particular on whether online facilitation requires different competencies than face-to-face, or whether, you know, how much are they the same, how much are they different. One word of warning, by the way, I've noticed if you create a sticky note on here and then touch the background, the sticky note disappears. Don't worry about it though, just touch anywhere else on the screen and it'll come back. The reason is that this isn't really a background, it's just a large image, and if you touch any of these things, that comes in front of everything else that's there. So just, if you lose all your post-its, don't worry, they're just lurking behind, and you can bring them back to the front by touching anywhere else on the screen. Is that clear? Any questions? So it's 20 past. I suggest let's give you, let's say 12 minutes. Are you ready, Bogdan, with the...
Yes.
With the breakout groups? Do you want to set the timer as well for 12 minutes?
Yes, I will.
And you should find a help button in your breakout room. If you need any help, let me know. One of us will come and help. And if you're in any doubt as to which room you're in, look at the very top left of your screen, and it should tell you which room you're in and which competency you're working on. Okay, enjoy. Welcome back as you begin to arrive. How was that?
Hey.
Was that interesting?
Yes.
Did you have enough time?
Yeah, we got to discuss about drama as well.
Oh, good.
How to create drama.
Which competencies did you have?
The second one, around the design of the sessions.
Mm-hmm. You got on the design part.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. Is everybody back, Bogdan? I guess so.
Yes.
Welcome back. I appreciate that's quite a short time, but I hope it's been enough time at least to read the competencies and get yourselves a little bit acquainted with them. What I'd like to do is go through each of the 6 competencies in turn. We don't have a lot of time to discuss them, so I don't want to invite you to read every example. But what I would like to do is just ask for anybody from each group to tell us if there are any questions of clarity you'd like to ask about the competencies you were working with, or any new insights for you, anything that was new to you that you hadn't thought of before that you came across in those competencies. So how about anybody from group 1 that was working on competency A, create collaborative client relationships? Any questions or new insights? Who is in group 1? Please raise your hand in the, or just go ahead and unmute and speak.
Anna, I think, wants to say something, and Dick.
Please do.
It was me, Aniela, and Cosmin in the group 1, and we worked on create collaborative client relationship. For us, it was quite clear because we have some experience in the background, so we thought of examples where we get introduced to this value and see how we develop it by doing. And I don't know if we have working with somebody else, because somebody else was also on the on the Jamboard and underlying things and placing post-its.
Could be.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know if Aniela and Cosmin, I know it's walking, so I don't know if he can join. But he had a great example when he worked with an international team, and they were split in teams, and they were working for a global goal without knowing, and they reached the conclusion that without collaboration between them and sharing knowledge and sharing the resources, they cannot reach the global goal. So for him was and I think it's an amazing example of collaborative.
Very good.
Yeah, and how to develop partnerships.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Maybe if you want to add something.
Yeah, I also just came to my mind an example when I was facilitating a training for the European Peer Training Organization, and we were two parallel workshops going on for a week. And we had to, well, of course, we worked a few months before on it, all the 4 facilitators. And we also had to find some common activities, joint activities while facilitating. But it was funny that while we were talking about all this, we also came with some examples of how the things are not going as smooth when you don't find this collaborative co-facilitation style. And it was yeah, we had the chance of expressing some old frustration there.
Thank you. let's just take one or two comments on each of these, and then we'll come back in plenary to look at all 6 together. Anybody from group 2 like to talk about competence B, plan appropriate group processes? Any questions of clarity or any new insights? Who is in group B?
So Bianca, Carmen, and myself, our discussions focused towards the remote sessions. So all the post-its are about the remote facilitation. And the key takeaway is that because for most of us it's something new, we have to prepare better. Especially because we had the competency around designing the sessions, we have to allocate time to prepare the content, prepare the process, prepare the tools, prepare the dynamics, prepare the everything. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody from group 3 that was working on competence C, create and sustain a participatory environment? What were your questions or insights?
I think there was.
Was there anyone in group C?
No
yes,
one.
I think Dec was in group C with Florin and Daniela.
Yeah, and we work on different slides, but I can refer on this, talking about creating and sustain participatory environment. I think the question technique is very important to keep all the participants involved in the process.
Thank you. Well, that's very relevant to when I come back at the end to talk about the model behind the questions I'm asking tonight. So thank you for that. Let's go to group 4 then, working on competence D, guiding the group to appropriate and useful outcomes. What were your questions or insights? Anyone?
One of our insight or one of our question was how can we, or in which I mean, how different are the facilitation techniques for guiding group to appropriate and useful outcomes when we talk about online versus offline? We don't see right now a big difference between those techniques, and we wanted to ask you if there is something extra we can do online versus offline besides adjusting the exercises and
Sure.
the type of the discussion.
Thank you. Let's come back to that if we may, when we've heard from the last 2. Anybody from group 5 who is working on building and maintaining professional knowledge?
It was Lăcrămioara and I. Lăcrămioara, would you like to say something? Actually, both of us had an aha moment. First, when you set the task, we thought that we understood what we have to do. And we realized how many times our participations had the same feeling. And we think that they know what they have to do, and in the end, it seems that is not so quite. So after a few minutes of debating on how to approach the task, we realized that all the competencies are important, but not all of them.
Applying.
Sorry?
It's applying in its
applying in our job, yeah. Because Lăcrămioara has a unique type of workshop that she facilitates. She's a coach as well, not necessarily a facilitator, but I am a facilitator, so I have to use all the competencies. And then we realized that most of the competencies or the examples, the practice, the best practices are available, not available, are as important as in offline, they are as important as they are in online. So besides adjusting, as our colleague said before, I don't know if it's something different.
Thank you. I tend to agree. My experience is that all of the competencies that they apply online as well as offline. Maybe they apply a little differently, but they all apply. How about the last group that was working on model positive professional attitude? Any questions or insights?
Questions, no. We have some technical problems, but we solved them.
Oh, good.
Mihaela, Danciu, and Laura was with me in the team. We had time just for free thoughts. And the most important thing is that online or face-to-face, you have to be authentic, to give credit to the others, even if you know the subject very well. It's important to be with empathy and communicate natural. And humor also is very important.
Absolutely.
For me, when I facilitate, I like to have some jokes with the
Absolutely.
people.
Thank you. Thank you for all of those groups for sharing your insights there. Are there any common themes? Any other questions or insights emerging after having heard all of them, or any that you didn't yet get to share? One of you, I said, hold that thought until we get to the end. Can you remind me what that thought was now?
Yeah, it was about how different or how should we facilitate. We felt that facilitating meetings in online and offline has the same approach, and we were curious if there is something we don't know yet about this difference. Mihaela, if this is what we talked about, or you want to say something else, please.
Yeah. So we discussed about, the methodologies are different. So the methods perhaps that you're using are definitely different to adjust the technology and everything, and the lack of having people in person and so on. And we gave as an example that if you want people to build something, together, of course, that's not something that you would be able to do in online, or maybe, there's a tool, I don't know. But from a facilitation point of view, like you as a facilitator, it's not much of a difference because you kind of use the same skills. It's more maybe that you use more attention to be able to also use the chat, and then, I don't know, some annotation tools or whatever, to play around with the technical stuff. But otherwise, what is your take on the difference?
So broadly speaking, I agree with what you're saying. I think facilitation is facilitation, whether it's online or offline, and the skills and competencies are broadly similar. Obviously, one big difference is the technology that you're using. And in a room, you need to know how to use a flip chart and marker pens and tables and chairs, that kind of thing. Online, people are responsible for their own tables and chairs. There's nothing you can do about that. And instead of flip charts and pens, you might use Jamboard, or you might use Mural, or you might use something else. And then obviously you need some means of seeing or hearing each other, or both. So what you need to be skilled at may be a little bit different in terms of technology, but basically the role is the same, I would say. The other big difference, I would say, is that there are different constraints and different opportunities. So a large part of the role of the facilitator, I think, is understanding what are the constraints and opportunities for a particular group in their particular context, and how can you work within those constraints and take advantage of the opportunities to enable them to do and be their best in the circumstances. Now, the constraints and opportunities are very different online. So what may be appropriate and what may be possible may be different, but the role is still very similar. You still have to identify the constraints, identify the opportunities, and work with them, use your creativity. What do you make of that? Any other thoughts in relation to that? What are your thoughts on how the competencies vary, if at all, between online and face-to-face?
So what I discovered going online is the skill of working with a co-facilitator, and both in designing and in facilitating, and eventually in following up. How do you collaborate and split the responsibilities? How to ensure smooth transitions between yourself and the co-facilitator, especially if the co-facilitator has also content pieces, so you alternate content as well. So I think this is a key difference that I discovered this month.
Thank you. Yes, I agree, actually. I think co-facilitation does apply similarly face-to-face as it does online, but I think the big difference is that you very often need a co-facilitator online, even with a very small group, because of the technology that needs to be managed. Whereas face-to-face, you may well decide that you only need a co-facilitator if you have a larger group. Generally speaking, because the technology is simpler when you're face-to-face, and everybody is more familiar with it. Facilitators and participants are generally much more familiar with how to use tables and chairs and pens and papers and that kind of thing. Of course, it depends on what you're doing in the room. Yes, Bogdan, and then I'll go on to the closing presentation.
I also discovered something, that in online you have to be more efficient with the timing and designing of the session. You can have a one-day session very easy, or more than one-day session in a classroom. But online you should be more efficient.
Yes, you generally have to have shorter sessions because they're much more exhausting. Mm-hmm. It's also quite possible for groups to be much more focused when they come to a short session online, and to get as much done in 1 hour as they might otherwise do in 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
It depends on what use you make of the time before and after the session. If you do a lot of work asynchronously, then they can make much more use of the synchronous time together. And we often don't think so much about asynchronous as an option when we're working face-to-face. We're often more inclined to do everything when we come together in the same place at the same time. Not necessarily, but typically. Oh, I had one last question. We have hardly any time for this, but just take a moment or two to write in the chat, if you would. What's one thing that you could do individually or together as peers to develop your own facilitation competence? Based on the conversation we had today, what's one thing you could do to develop your own facilitation competence further? Type any thoughts in the chat. Just a moment or two more to type in the chat. So let me start sharing a little bit about the method that I've used today, and do feel free to continue to type in the chat if you haven't had a chance to write yet. So I said at the beginning, this was a focused conversation online that I would be demonstrating the top focus conversation method. This is a method that's been developed and applied by ICA over about 50 years all over the world in a wide variety of different contexts. It's built on a model of how we as human beings experience life. So a model of the natural human process. The model is often called ORID, after the acronym for the 4 levels. What the model suggests is that as human beings, we experience life first through our senses, through touch, sight, sound, taste, and smell, and through our perception of what's going on around us and our perception of our experience. We have some kind of a reflective level response, emotional, intuitive, or an associational response. So we might be shocked or surprised or excited, confused. We might be reminded of something. Only based on our sensory perception and our reflective response, we begin to make sense of our experience. Our head begins to kick in, and we have what we call the interpretive level of experience. And then finally, at the decisional level, we come to some sort of a conclusion or resolution, possibly even an action. So the model says that all of us are going through these 4 levels all of the time. Very often we're not aware of them, but this is the process by which we experience life and by which determines our behavior. Now, facilitation, I would argue, is essentially about leadership of human process, of group process. So if you're going to design an intentional human process to take a group through a process together to achieve a goal, what better model to base your design on than a model of the natural human process? So the idea is that you build your conversation or your workshop, your process, in order to take a group through all 4 of these levels. And in the case of the focused conversation method, the simplest application of ORID, basically you just design a series of questions that will elicit responses at each of the 4 levels. Of course, you need to know what your aims are for the conversation in the first place. And in this case, it was to help you understand better the IAF core competencies framework, also to consider how the competencies apply online and offline and what you can do to develop your own competence. In this case, the questions that I asked you, my objective level question was essentially to ask you to study the framework and underline or mark keywords or phrases. So what are the skills, knowledges, and behaviours that facilitators must have according to the framework? The reflective level questions I asked were asking you to reflect back on your own experience and think of what these competencies reminded you of, and to share examples of how you've seen or used these competencies in practice. The interpretive level was how the competencies apply based on all that you've shared already, how they apply online or offline. In other words, what's the difference between the online and the offline examples that you've shared? And then the decisional level was about what you could do next in order to continue to develop your facilitation competence. So it was essentially a 4-level process and 4 questions, 1 question per level. It was a little more complicated than that in this online environment because we used Jamboard as well as voice communication for the first 2 levels. And then we shared in plenary something that came out of the first 2 levels before moving on to the 3rd and 4th level. But that's basically how the model works. And it can be applied not only to a short conversation with a small group, it can also be applied with large groups, for example, in conjunction with World Cafe. It can be applied to a whole session of 3 or 4 hours, to a whole day, to a whole week. The focused conversation method, and ORID in particular, is the basis of the whole of ICA's technology of participation, which is the name given to the methodology developed by ICA over these 50-odd years. The other core methods that work alongside focused conversation are the consensus building method, action planning, strategic planning, and historical scanning, but there are many others. And in terms of resources, there's a book which I highly recommend about the focused conversation method, and there are also other books about the other methods published by ICA Canada. The focused conversation method and the consensus workshop method are included in the 2-day face-to-face course Group Facilitation Methods, which is now also available online. And there's one of those coming up in June and July. And if you click on these links, I'll share the slides afterwards in PDF as well. You'll also find links to ICA's worldwide and to IAF worldwide. There's no ICA in Romania as it happens, but there is in, there's an ICA associate in Poland. I think that's your nearest, and Ukraine. So that's that. How do you rate the session is what I'm going to come to next. Are there any quick questions, first of all, about the model? I see it is time up already, but if you can afford to take a few more minutes, I'm happy to stay for a few more. Are there any questions or reflections on that? In that case, please share any reflections on the session in the chat, if you would. And let's also share the poll, Bogdan, if you're ready for that. And let me invite you to share a little bit of feedback on the session in the poll. Thank you. So I hope you can see that in front of you now. There are 6 questions, so do scroll down when you've answered the first 2 and then hit submit.
And in the meantime, people can share also with voice, or they can ask more questions, or?
By all means. What I suggest for the time being, because it's a minute or 2 past already, please submit your feedback in the poll. and also any other feedback you have to share in the chat. Let me also say thank you to all of you for attending, and thanks Bogdan and IAF Romania for the opportunity, for the invitation. I will be sharing the recording of the session hopefully tomorrow, and also the slides that I shared during the session. I shall edit the names out of the chat and share the content of the chat as well. And you're able to save the chat for yourself if you'd like to. Feel free to do that. Bogdan, would you like to say a closing word before I switch the recording off? And then by all means, anybody who'd like to stay and talk more, let's do that.
If you want to know how to join IAF Romania, already somebody asked me on the chat, you can contact me afterwards. And what else? It's in the future sessions, we would like to take maybe each of the competencies in to discuss and to try to see how we can develop on that.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's actually a question from myself, or request maybe, if we will have the opportunity to deepen into this method, because it seems very simple, very logical, but still it needs to be practiced.
You refer to ORATE method?
Yeah.
The trainings are for that.
It's about focus conversation.
And
yes, exactly.
And 6 competencies as well.
Florin at least has taken training in this. I'm not sure if anybody else has, but Florin can certainly tell you more. I do recommend the book. What I can also say is that this is the structure of this session was based on, I mentioned at the beginning, on a series of sessions, online focus conversations. There are a few more of those coming up, including one that I'm leading next week, which is going to be a very large one. We've got 300 registrations already. I'm not expecting everybody to show up, but I'm thinking we're going to get at least 100, maybe 150 people. So if you're interested to see a large example, there's that opportunity. I've got a 2.5-hour introduction to online facilitation training session coming up, which will be looking in a little bit more depth at the focus conversation method. And then also the online group facilitation methods course. That's a series of 6 2-hour sessions over 3 weeks. And the first week is all about focus conversation. The second week is all about consensus workshop. That's the online equivalent of the 2-day face-to-face course. So yes, there's lots of opportunity for looking into that more deeply if you're interested to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off the recording, and if anybody would like to stay and talk more, please do. But thank you all for coming.